My entire family, my Aunt Cassandra and my cousin Bryce, spent the last year of my grandmother Imogen's life treating me like a housemaid, then cutting me out entirely for not being grateful enough for the scraps they offered. They didn't just exclude me from the will reading. They sent me a cruel, formal letter confirming that I was disinvited. When I showed up at the Greenwich mansion anyway, they laughed, smugly seated in the antique library, ready to divvy up the $45 million estate. My aunt sneered, "There's nothing for you here, Mia. Go home." But they had all missed one crucial detail. They thought Grandma's lawyer, Mr. Sterling Finch, was there to execute a simple document. They were wrong. He was there to deliver a verdict. And when he paused, looked over their greedy faces, and finally landed his gaze on me, the ungrateful outcast, he cleared his throat and announced, "Before we begin, I need to confirm the sole and principal beneficiary is present. Good morning, Miss Hawthorne." My family's world, built on years of manipulation and entitlement, was about to shatter, executed by the very woman they had dismissed. The Connecticut air was thick with the scent of pine and old money. Even the gravel driveway of the Vance estate, a 50-acre fortress in Greenwich, sounded expensive as my tires crunched over it. I drove my modest 4-year-old sedan, a vehicle that, in this neighborhood, signaled absolute failure. I was Amelia Mia Hawthorne, 32 years old, and I was exactly 45 minutes early to the reading of my grandmother Imogen Vance's last will and testament, a ceremony from which I had been formally excluded. My grandmother, Imogen, had been a titan, a sharp, emotionally distant woman who had built a $45 million real estate investment empire over 5 decades. She was a woman who saw the world as a complex transaction, and her family was no exception. She had dangled her immense fortune before us for years, observing who jumped highest and who merely stood firm. For the last 18 months of her life, when her health declined significantly, the dynamic intensified. This became the final, brutal competition. My Aunt Cassandra Cassie Hawthorne, Imogen's only surviving child, and her 28-year-old son, my cousin Bryce, immediately quit their barely jobs. Cassie owned a perpetually failing boutique in West Hartford, a vanity project built on credit, and Bryce was an aspirational travel influencer, who mostly just documented his mother's debt. They moved into the east wing of the Greenwich mansion, transforming themselves into Imogen's self-appointed, full-time attendants. They spent their days fluffing pillows, reading stock reports, and competing to be the loudest voice in the room, all while running up the estate's domestic service bill. Mia was different. I was a restoration architect in Boston. My business was finally stable and successful, specializing in preserving historical integrity, a direct counterpoint to my grandmother's approach of ruthless acquisition and development. I flew down every weekend, meticulously organizing Imogen's medical bills, managing her investment paperwork, ensuring her staff was paid, and reading to her, not the financial journals Cassie preferred, but actual poetry and history books, subjects Imogen had secretly loved in her youth. The friction point, the betrayal they would never forgive, came 6 months before her death. Imogen needed 24/7 care. Cassie demanded that I quit my job immediately, move in and provide the care, out of family duty. "Your job is just fiddling with old bricks, Mia," Cassie had sneered during a particularly brutal Sunday dinner. "This is your family legacy. Show some damn gratitude for the opportunity you've been given to serve your grandmother and earn your inheritance." I looked at Imogen, who was watching us with an unnerving, calculating stillness. I knew this was the final test. If I quit my career, I'd be trading my self-sufficiency for a chance at her money, the exact behavior she despised. I held her gaze. "Grandma, I love you, and I will hire the best night nurse available, paid for from your accounts, because you deserve professional care. But I will not trade my career for a chance at a handout. That would be disrespectful to everything you taught me about independence." Cassie exploded, calling me selfish, arrogant, and finally, ungrateful. Imogen only nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. From that day forward, I was officially the ungrateful niece. Cassie ensured every communication painted me as the heartless careerist, and I was effectively exiled, only allowed to visit during pre-approved, monitored slots. Imogen passed away 6 weeks ago. The funeral was a lavish, over-the-top affair planned entirely by Cassie, designed more as a social event for creditors than a tribute to Imogen. I was relegated to the back row, a distant cousin. The true insult arrived last week. A thick cream-colored envelope, sealed with the crest of Finch and Sterling Legal. It wasn't an invitation to the reading, it was a formal, terse notification of exclusion. It stated, due to the express and recent instructions of the decedent, Ms. Amelia Hawthorne is not required nor invited to attend the reading of the last will and testament, scheduled for 10 a.m. on Monday, December 8th, at the Vance estate. The letter was signed by Cassie and Bryce, who had somehow secured an advance copy of the meeting details. I spent 3 days staring at that letter. It wasn't about the money, it was about the public finality of their contempt. They wanted to humiliate me, to confirm to the wider family that I had lost. I called my associate and told her I would be taking a personal day of high importance. I wasn't going to beg for inclusion. I was going to show up to witness their smug satisfaction and retain my dignity, the only thing they hadn't been able to take. The mansion's heavy oak front door was opened by a new staff member Cassie had hired, a young man with a perpetually stressed expression. "May I help you?" he asked, trying to block the entrance. "I'm Hawthorne. I believe the reading is in the library," I said, my voice firm. He checked a clipboard. "Ma'am, your name is not on the—" "I know." I cut him off, stepping past him into the echoing marble foyer. "But my last name is Vance and I am here." The air in the foyer was heavy with the smell of old wood, dust, and cheap floral arrangements left over from the funeral. I walked toward the library, my hands firmly clasped in front of my custom-tailored navy suit. The library was breathtaking. 3 walls of floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves, filled with leather-bound volumes, dominated by a massive, polished mahogany table in the center. Cassie, Bryce, and Marcus, Imogen's middle-aged brother, were already seated, looking anticipatory and far too relaxed. Cassie saw me first. Her eyes widened in alarm, instantly replaced by a venomous sneer. She was wearing the gold dragonfly brooch, Imogen's favorite, the one she had promised me when I was 16. Cassie had clearly appropriated it already. "Mia, what in God's name are you doing here?" Cassie hissed, her voice cutting through the silence. "I came to pay my respects," I said calmly, standing near the doorway. "Respects? You lost the right to pay respects when you chose your precious bricks over your own blood," she spat, gesturing wildly with a hand weighed down by several large gold rings. "Didn't you read the letter? There is nothing for the ungrateful niece here. Go home." Bryce chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Yeah, Mia. You're making things awkward. No last-minute redemption tour today. Go back to your Boston brownstones." I didn't move. I fixed my gaze on the empty chair at the end of the long table. "I will wait here. For the sake of decency, which you seem to have forgotten." Cassie was about to launch into another tirade when the double doors opened, and Mr. Sterling Finch walked in. Mr. Finch was ancient, impeccably dressed, and represented generations of New England wealth and legal stability. His presence instantly silenced the room. He didn't acknowledge anyone immediately. He simply set his worn leather briefcase on the table, took out a single, thick manila envelope, and removed a pair of gold-rimmed reading glasses. He then looked up, taking in the scene. He saw Cassie and Bryce seated, smug and expectant. He saw Marcus looking merely impatient. And then he saw me, standing stiffly by the door, an intruder in the scene of their expected triumph. He gave me a long, piercing look. It was a look of deep, profound recognition. "Good morning," Mr. Finch said, his voice dry and authoritative. He didn't ask me to sit. He simply began. "As executor of the estate and longtime counsel to Mrs. Imogen Vance, I am here to read the last will and testament, executed this past March," Mr. Finch stated. He paused, looking directly at Cassie. Cassie, unable to resist, leaned forward, addressing Mr. Finch but looking at me. "Mr. Finch, if I may, I just need to confirm for my own peace of mind. Is Ms. Amelia Hawthorne's continued presence required? Given her ungrateful behavior and the explicit terms of the exclusion notification." Mr. Finch held up a hand. The gesture was tiny, but the command was absolute. "Ms. Hawthorne's presence, both here and in the life of Mrs. Vance, is central to this document. I need to confirm the sole and principal beneficiary is present." Cassie smiled, smugly tilting her head toward Bryce. "Well, she is. Bryce is right here." Mr. Finch adjusted his spectacles, his eyes moving past Cassie and Bryce, finally landing squarely on me, standing by the door. He cleared his throat. "Good morning, Miss Hawthorne." The air fractured. Cassie froze, her smile dissolving into a gaping hole of confusion. Bryce stopped tapping his pen. Marcus blinked once, slowly. My heart hammered, but I remained outwardly still. "Now that the principal beneficiary is present," Mr. Finch continued, unfolding the document with the slow, deliberate care of a judge delivering a capital sentence, "we shall proceed." He began reading the preamble, a long, flowery paragraph about gratitude, family, and loyalty, all the things Cassie and Bryce claimed to embody. Then came the first bombshell. The late Mrs. Vance directed that a cash sum of $500,000, be immediately transferred to the person who demonstrated the most significant personal sacrifice in the final year of her life. Cassie beamed, nudging Bryce, already calculating her new wardrobe. "That person is Ms. Amelia Hawthorne, who, despite her professional demands, ensured the seamless, continuous operation of the estate's logistical and medical needs. This dedication of time and professional skill, as documented in her meticulous organizational charts and expense reports, far surpassed the domestic efforts of others." Cassie's smile evaporated. But I was here every day. I moved in. She called me her star." Mrs. Vance kept an extensive private journal detailing the sacrifices made, Mr. Finch stated clinically. "She noted you only moved in because your own lease expired, Cassandra. And she explicitly noted that she considered unpaid, amateur efforts to be highly suspicious. The $500,000 is to compensate Amelia for the thousands of hours of unpaid professional logistical management." Next, Mr. Finch reached clause 4, the main event. "To my loving brother Marcus Vance, I leave my collection of extremely rare, uncirculated Confederate currency. I hope you enjoy their historical value." Marcus, who was an amateur numismatist, let out a delighted gasp. But Mr. Finch paused. Mrs. Vance added a codicil. "The value of this currency is entirely dependent on its authenticity." She included a letter stating, "Dear Marcus, I know you love the idea of historical wealth, but I also know you lack the ability to check the details. These bills are all perfect reproductions. They are worthless. Enjoy the paper." Marcus's face went white. Cassie snickered, then instantly regretted it when Mr. Finch moved to her section. "To my daughter, Cassandra Hawthorne, I bequeath the contents of the West Wing's antique furniture. This includes the Venetian glass cabinet, the French tapestry, and the solid walnut dining set." Cassie let out a triumphant cry. "Yes. That's worth millions. That's my whole future." "And to my grandson Bryce Hawthorne," Mr. Finch continued without pause, "I bequeath the entire portfolio of my shares in the Velvet Hanger Boutique." Bryce hooped, pumping his fist. "Mom's shop. She'll finally have capital. We're saved." Cassie leaned back, her face radiating smug vindication. "See, Mia? We got the assets. You got a nice thank you card. Now if you'll excuse us, we have to talk about liquidating the remainder of the estate, the house, the land, the main investment accounts, to finance our future." I watched them with a quiet detachment, realizing they were celebrating the possession of a handful of pebbles, unaware that the entire coastline was about to be washed away by a tsunami. They had completely missed the meaning of principal beneficiary. Mr. Finch placed the document flat on the table and looked at the family's expectant, greedy faces. He then looked at me. I finally walked toward the table, pulling up a chair and sitting down, my own copy of the exclusion letter clutched in my hand. "That leads us to the residual estate," Mr. Finch said, his voice dropping to a low, chilling register. "The remaining assets include the primary residence, the surrounding 50 acres of land, the entirety of the liquid investment accounts, and the shares of the Vance Development Holding Company, collectively valued at approximately $45,400,000. Cassie and Bryce practically vibrated with excitement. "The house is mine. It's split 50/50ths. Mr. Finch didn't raise his voice, but his words sliced through the air like razor wire. I have read the bequests of specific items. We now address the main corpus of the Vance estate. He lifted the document and read the single, devastating sentence. To my granddaughter, Amelia Hawthorne, who alone understood the value of earned independence and who refused to compromise her professional integrity for the promise of a reward, I leave the entire residual estate, including the Vance estate property, the development holding company, and all remaining cash and liquid assets, without restriction. The library dissolved into a maelstrom of sound. Cassie let out a scream, a raw, inarticulate sound of pure agony, rage, and disbelief. No. You can't. I'm her daughter. I was here every day. She called me ungrateful. She called me ungrateful. Bryce jumped up, knocking his chair backward. This is a fraud. A legal mistake. She would never. Mr. Finch slammed his open hand flat on the table. The sound echoed like a thunderclap. Silence. The document is witnessed, notarized, and legally sound. Mrs. Vance used a complex, 5-year trust system to ensure her wishes were absolutely ironclad. I remained seated, watching the destruction of their entitlement. I spoke only once, directing my words not to them, but to the lawyer. Mr. Finch, concerning the antique furniture bequeathed to Cassandra, what is the current disposition? Mr. Finch consulted a side note. The antique furniture. Ah yes. A post-mortem appraisal revealed extensive hidden dry rot and termite damage. The items are structurally unsound and must be legally destroyed as they pose an infestation risk to the house. The cost of removal and disposal is estimated at $32,000. Cassie stumbled backward, grasping the dragonfly brooch on her chest, her eyes wild. $32,000. To get rid of it? But the brooch. She promised me the brooch. I finally looked directly at my aunt, the woman who had called me worthless and ungrateful for 20 years. Mr. Finch, I interrupted softly. The gold dragonfly brooch on Miss Hawthorne's lapel was a specific item my grandmother promised me on my 16th birthday, contingent on certain academic achievements. Since it was not mentioned in the will, I assume it falls under the residual estate. Precisely, Miss Hawthorne, Mr. Finch confirmed, nodding. I stood up, adjusting the cuffs of my navy suit. Cassandra, as the new owner of the residual estate, I am giving you 1 hour to remove yourself and my cousin from the property. As for the brooch, that piece of jewelry is now mine. You can either hand it over, or I will authorize the estate's security team to remove it, and the cost of that extraction will be deducted from your inheritance, which, I remind you, is precisely $0. Cassie's hands flew to the brooch, protecting it uselessly. Her face was a landscape of betrayal and financial ruin. She was bankrupt, excluded, and now faced the shame of being literally stripped of her single act of theft. Bryce stood immobile, pale and defeated. Marcus, the uncle, simply picked up his bag of worthless counterfeit money and slipped out quietly. An hour later, I was back in Mr. Finch's office in New Haven, the scent of old leather and wealth filling the air. He poured me a scotch, which I accepted. That was quite the performance, Miss Hawthorne, he said, settling into his chair. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. She wasn't cold. She was conducting an audit of character. The ungrateful part, did she really see me that way? I asked, looking down at the heavy gold dragonfly brooch I had secured. She saw your refusal to abandon your life for her money as the ultimate act of gratitude and respect, Mr. Finch explained, leaning forward. She had a series of secret cameras installed, not for security, but to observe your family's interactions. She saw Cassie selling off pieces of her own shop inventory to cover her lifestyle, while claiming to care for her. She saw you, Mia, flying in after a full work week, doing the boring, necessary paperwork, and then most crucially, insisting she receive professional care, not the care of a desperate amateur. The exclusion letter wasn't meant for you. It was meant to be a final, public test for them. She wanted to see if they were so bold, so arrogant, that they would actually weaponize her death. He smiled, a dry legal smile. They passed her test. They showed their true nature. And your exclusion was her final, brilliant move to ensure you, the only person who deserved the estate, would receive it entirely without complication or challenge from her greedy kin. That entire $45 million is yours, Mia. She even added a clause making you the sole executor of the Vance Development Holding Company, meaning you now control all of her ongoing real estate investments. I stood up, feeling the immense, crushing weight of the brooch and the inheritance. It wasn't just money, it was confirmation. I had been right all along. Principal was the highest form of reward. I returned to the Vance estate the next day, not as a guest, but as the owner. I gave the stressed-out young staff member a massive bonus and a promotion. I called a charity dedicated to preserving historical landmarks and began drawing up the paperwork to transfer 50% of the Lake George property, the land I truly cared about, to them as a permanent conservation easement, ensuring it would never be bulldozed for condos. As for the West Wing, the chamber that housed the dry-rotted furniture Cassie so desperately wanted, I hired a team to meticulously dismantle and incinerate every stick of it, personally sending Cassie a photo of the smoking rubble, along with a final, formal invoice for the $32,000 removal fee. I had been called ungrateful, but I was the only one who truly appreciated the lessons Imogen taught. Earned success is the only success, and the best revenge is the one executed with the cold, perfect authority of a well-written document.